Hello and welcome to the International Business Conversation podcast. My name is Dr. Irina Goch and today I'm with my student.
My name is Vendela and I'm, as Irina said, her student here at the Montfort University on the International Business Program.
Today we're doing something exciting. We're going to talk about Bloomberg and how Vendela used it for her dissertation in relations to visualization and maps. Stay tuned. I remember when we first talked about Bloomberg, you mentioned that you were a bit overwhelmed with the experience. So could you please describe what that experience was like for you using Bloomberg for the first time and how did you feel?
So the first time we were actually using it was in the module previous to the dissertation. It's called Emerging Markets. And I think what kind of made me feel a bit overwhelmed with the system is because there's so many different functions that you can use in Bloomberg and like an endless amount of filters for each sort of data set in each function that you can sort of tailor to exactly what you need. Even though there's a very like holistic view you can use it for, there's also very detailed information in there. And I think before you sort of get more comfortable with using the system or like the software, that was kind of what was a bit like overwhelming. But that's definitely the part that was also the most like exciting with using Bloomberg.
So it's the unfamiliarity.
Yeah.
Now we're talking about maps and visualization. So you've spent now some time in Bloomberg and you explore different maps and the map function in general. Could you tell us more about those maps and what kind of information can you access with Bloomberg?
So in my dissertation, that has been the backbone of all of my data collection. It's been based on only using visualization. So when you look at the maps, there's as I said, like endless amount of filters that you can apply and also remove. So you can look at both first and second nature geography. So like infrastructure, power plants, ports, roads, but you can also look at factories. So offices that companies have. But what's the most interesting that I found is that you can also look at in which stage the power plants or factories are in. So, for example, you can look at planned factories, but you can also look at power plants from a point of view where even just down to like something so detailed as like where the permit's been announced and also where permit's been removed and stuff like that. So that has been very interesting.
So, for example, we currently have a map on the display and we can see, I think there are ports, plants, and vessels. So there are 3 different maps on one screen.
You can see on the screen here, we got the map function open in Bloomberg. So on the right-hand side here, you can see lots of different data sets that you can actually apply to the map, which is what I've been mostly exploring with my dissertation. So if we take a look on here, it's everything from first to second nature geography and sort of almost everything in between. So if you have a look at factories, for example, you will see all of these different dots that's populated the map are different data sets. So this includes anything from admin plans to R&D and manufacturing, all showed in different colors. But what I found almost the most interesting about these data sets is the different filters that you can utilize. So for example, now we can see all of the active factories around the world. And what I kind of thought was the most interesting is the fact that they all cluster in the same areas. However, you can also have a look at, for example, plant factories, which then gives a whole different insight into investments that is planned to happen, which kind of shows that you don't only have to use quantitative data to sort of analyze these kind of things, but a visual like this can also actually really help decision making. So now on the screen we can see the power plants data sets, and as you probably can see, there's a lot more different colors going on the screen. The reason for this is because each color represents a different type of power plant, which can also be useful for a company from, for example, a sustainability point of view, whether or not they're only going to use, for example, green energy, or if they need a certain type of power plant depending on their operations. But But what's extra interesting about this, I think, is the fact that you can also look at the status of the power plant, and it's got a lot more different filters than the factories actually do. So you can look at anything from abandoned power plants to announced to, for example, where they got financing secured or even the permit obtained, which could essentially then give a company a head start onto where they would actually want to relocate. So those are just a few examples of what you can actually use the Bloomberg terminal and maps and visualization for, showing these different types of clusters that essentially show visual relationships, showing that financial data can actually be interpreted in so many ways.
Your dissertation focuses on using geographic visualization in the international business aspect to identify investment hotspots. So could you tell us more about the topic itself and what has inspired you?
Yeah, first up with what inspired me about my dissertation was definitely the way that we use Bloomberg in the emerging markets module, because that kind of enabled me to start thinking about how there's actually so many more ways to think about investment hotspots and also to sort of interpret data. So not only looking at like a screen with a bunch of numbers, but you can also look at something like a map like this and actually take away key understandings from it. And then in terms of like investment hotspots, I've always found it quite fascinating with the global business environment and sort of what it is about certain locations that actually draw investments more than others. So that is like in a nutshell what my dissertation has revolved around, and what kind of inspired me to write it.
Could you tell us more about how do you actually use those maps to identify investment hotspots? What role does the visual element play in your analysis?
So as with any other dissertation, I've obviously done a literature review, and as far as I understood it, all of the literature that I've been looking into sort of circled in on infrastructure, natural geography, and connectivity as like key concepts of what may or may not make a hotspot. So what I did was obviously look at the literature, and then I was using different maps in Bloomberg, looking at all of these different factors and indicators, and looked into the collocation of these factors. And I looked whether or not they actually do attract any investment, and if what the literature said is true when looking at the maps. And it was quite interesting because what I found using the maps, it both complemented and contradicted what the literature review was saying. So yeah, it's been very interesting.
What kind of advice could you give to educators and students in the business fields who may feel intimidated and also a bit overwhelmed with the software that they have never used before, particularly because it is perceived as a financial tool more than anything else? But given your experience with visualization and creative aspect of using it, how could you help others? What kind of advice could you give to everyone who may be interested in following your footsteps?
I would say that the first step is obviously to get started using the software, and even though it might be overwhelming at first, that's also what makes the software so useful, to kind of just learning by doing kind of thing. So that's at least what I kind of experienced. The more I was using Bloomberg, the more comfortable I obviously got using it. And I think one of the key takeaways, especially for educators, is to it's kind of the fact that there's different ways to interpret and see data. So for someone like me, I do enjoy looking at financial stuff and data related things, but that doesn't mean that you can't combine it with a map like this to portray your ideas in a more creative way. That's definitely one of the biggest recommendations, to kind of not just narrow in on all of the financial aspects of Bloomberg, because at least in my opinion, the maps are just as useful as the rest of it.
Now you are approaching the end of your undergraduate studies. So what are your plans?
As I'm sure you can imagine, it does feel a little bit bittersweet coming to an end with the bachelor's, because for me personally it involves moving back from the UK to Sweden. But with that said though, I'm very excited for what's to come. So during the summer I've got an internship at a company called Magna. It's a Canadian company. I will be looking into supply chain management, which is going to be very interesting. And then when autumn comes, I'm actually starting my master's at a university in Sweden, in Lund, in international strategic management. So I'm very excited, definitely.
I am excited for you, and I'm looking forward to learning about all the success that will come in your future. Thank you very much, Vendela, for spending this time with me. And I hope our viewers will find, I'm sure our viewers will find this useful.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Irina. It's been very fun.
Can we keep that?